Hey everybody, welcome to the Remarkable Coach podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pacheco. I'm here with Dr. Margie Warrell. Dr. Margie is a global authority on living with courage and unlocking the potential that fear holds dormant. A best-selling author of 5 books, Margie gets to the heart of why we so often fail to do the very things that would help us thrive, sharing down-to-earth advice on how we can be braver in our work, relationships, leadership, and life. Margie, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be with you, Michael.
So I always like to kind of start these out with just basically a broad introduction. Just tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
I always struggle to sum it up in 10 words or less. As someone said recently, you were a multi-hyphenate before it was a thing, Margie. But yeah, so as you may tell from my accent, I hail from the deep, deep South, from Australia. I grew up on a dairy farm, big sister of 7 kids.
Nice.
We had I guess you could say it was a pretty organic childhood before having organic childhoods was considered the thing. And
free range childhood.
Yeah, it was very free range. You know, I mean, I think there was years where we didn't even have a television. We rode horses. We tried to run each other over on motorbikes, and helped my dad milk cows, and I helped my mum make cakes. And we never went to restaurants. My school was one building. I was the only kid in my grade, the entire elementary school. And so, yeah, when I was 18, I decided I wanted to spread my wings and went off and was the first in my family, went to university, which felt like a big deal at the time. And then after that, kind of got my confidence up to explore and got to put on a backpack at 21 and went backpacking around the world for a year. And that whet my appetite to just explore the world more fully. And so then went back traveling around the Middle East and Africa, and met my husband in that mix. Then we moved to Papua New Guinea and started the journey of having kids as well. And at the same time, I took a career change and left the world of business that I'd studied and studied psychology, which ultimately took me down the path of coaching. And that's been a 20-plus year journey working in just the field of personal and professional development. And I've since lived in multiple continents and had 4 kids and written 5 books, yes, but also, I had my share of struggles and heartaches and hardships. And I think it's the message of courage that weaves through all my work has been one, you teach best what you most need to learn, Michael. And I've certainly had to break ranks with my comfort zone many times, but just learning to take that risk that I think living a good life requires, just having the guts to sometimes risk just being exposed as inadequate, which I feel I've done many times. And I still have the voice in my head that goes, who do you think you are? And what if you fail? And what will people say? And yet, having just sort of defied that voice many times, I've realized how little reason most of us ever have to buy into those doubts that so often keep us living too safely.
Yeah. So I've heard the the idea of facing your fear or follow the fear. You've heard that put 100. Everyone's heard it put 100 different ways. I love the way that you put it of breaking the rank with your comfort zone. Is that intentional that you say it like that? Is that a specific way of thinking about it, of approaching that?
Yeah, I guess good question. I don't know when I started using that language on it. I mean, obviously we've all heard of the comfort zone and it's sort of almost cliche. When I say breaking ranks from it, yes, I guess it speaks to the way I view it is that, I mean, we're hardwired to seek safety and comfort and certainty and predictability. And we have to really rise above that instinctive desire in order for us to, I believe, live the lives we're capable of living and live really rewarding lives. And so we have to sort of break ranks. We have to do the very thing that, you kind of are scared to do, almost being a nonconformist at times. You're worried, what will people say? You're not doing the safe thing. And And I know at times I've had a sick feeling in my belly. I've had that feeling many times. But yeah,
Yeah,
doing it anyway.
I brought that up because I feel like, I mean, I'm a big believer that words are important, and those words that you chose, I just think, like the status quo, like you said, we're hardwired very specifically that the status quo is comfort and safety and security, and so instead of follow your fear sounds very heroic, whereas breaking rank with your comfort zone sounds a little more, I don't know, rebellious, I guess. Maybe a little more doable, to my ears at least.
It's a little bit defiant, isn't it?
Right?
It's like, oh, and I actually I just recently got asked to put together a short bio for something, and someone said, "Oh, Margie, you seem to defy self-doubt." And I thought,
Mm-hmm.
it's true, like being defiant. There is that conscious decision
Mm-hmm.
to do the very thing that you kind of are scared to do, and to defy the little voices in your head that go, "You're gonna fail. What will people say?" And you're like, ugh, yeah, shut up. I'm gonna just, thank you, but shut up, and off I go.
Yeah.
And I wish those voices. Sometimes people say, "Oh, how do you silence?" So I said, I don't think. Look, I'm obviously clearly not evolved enough to silence the voices. I think
Mm-hmm.
I've just got better at not letting the voices run the show.
Uh-huh. Don't let them drive the bus. They got to sit passenger.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I actually wrote about that in my most recent book. You've Got This. There's a chapter in there on doubt your doubts,
Uh-huh.
and I think we've all got a doubt FM going in the back of our heads. And I frankly think women sometimes have it even louder and playing more often than men do. Not always. It's obviously a generalization, but certainly
Sure.
I see a lot of women in particular just really underestimating and shortchanging themselves, and really letting the self-doubt sit there in the
Yeah.
driver's seat. And I'm like, that it's just a lot of chatter going on in the background, but you don't have to buy into the chatter. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
truth. I mean, your fear is real, but what you're telling yourself is not the truth very
Yeah.
often.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the idea of I think it's, in my experience, for in my journey and my personal journey, it's been important, I think, to acknowledge the ego, and then kick it out of the driver's seat and just say, I hear you, I see what you're getting at, I appreciate you looking out for me. I'm gonna go ahead and take over now.
Yeah, and I think that's where, say, mindfulness. Obviously, it's sort of been the new buzzword, but it's an ancient practice, right? And but just paying attention to what you're paying attention to, and noticing what that narrative is that you're telling yourself. Oh, look, I'm not sure if I'm going to try this, and I haven't had that much experience, and this could go wrong, and I remember that time I tried before, and just noticing, oh, okay, there I am thinking of all the things that I haven't done well before, or all the things that could go wrong.
Hmm.
And the practice of mindfulness helps us just to notice, just to wake up to where we are getting caught into this whole narrative, and that doubting voice in the back of our heads, that negative, cynical, fear-mongering voice is calling the shots. And I think it's only human nature. I mean, that we have that negativity bias. We're going to look at what's wrong, what's missing, who's to blame, where
Hmm.
we aren't good enough. And I think the more we can just realize who you are is not that voice. Who you are is not your doubts. Who you are is not even your past failures. Who
Hmm.
you are is something that is far bigger than that transcends all of that.
Hmm.
And to me, that's what it is to live really powerfully. And it's something, that word power is one I've written about a lot, I talk about a lot. And I actually, when I was doing my PhD, it was one of the kind of constructs I was really interested in, how senior female leaders related to it, because sometimes people can react in a negative way to the word powerful when I talk about, live powerfully and step
Yep.
into your power.
It's a big
And I
word.
think
With a lot
Well,
of
and
different associations, right? People
yeah,
associate with different things.
people can have, in fact, sometimes people have, particularly women, I think, a very negative association because they think of it as power seeking,
Right.
power over, sort of very egoic in its how it manifests. And yet, when I talk about living powerfully and really holding yourself in your power, what I'm talking about is not letting fear or pride, which is really fear as well,
Sure.
not letting that run the show, but you really owning and honoring your unique greatness, your potential, the divine within you, and really operating from that place. And it's not a proud thing. When I talk about, I'm feeling powerful and being empowered, it's not, oh yeah, because I'm better than. It's really just that I'm connected to myself and to everyone else. And it's just it so transcends that ego, that force of the ego in our lives.
You're almost describing a state of being more than a social state, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, as you would know yourself, our being speaks more loudly than our words, right? And so when you meet people who are really grounded in self-certainty, they're really grounded in their innate value and worthiness. They don't have to tell you how brilliant they are. And they don't have to tell you, what they've done. They don't have to tell you, oh, yes, I've made this much money, or I've built this business, or I've, got a PhD, even though I've clearly told you that. They are just who they are. They're just very assured in themselves, and they have such a bigger impact on others. And so I think we live in a world that's constantly triggering our insecurities and people's need to keep up and to prove and impress and please. And I think when we're really operating from that place of being grounded in our innate worthiness and adequacy, we are holding ourselves in our power, and we can do so much more and impact people's lives in such a bigger magnified way.
When does living in your own power with courage and that confidence that you were talking about, when does that become arrogance?
Well, like, to me, arrogance.
Are those two different things? Do you think there's a risk of?
Yeah, well, I think there is a risk because we hear about it. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so, and I think, I know for me that I think arrogance is when we think we are better than others.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. We had some technical difficulties, but we're back with Dr. Margie Warrell. So, Margie, I think we were talking about the dangers of, like, where is the line of delineation between living in your power, right, and that kind of potentially turning into arrogance or something, becoming a negative attribute rather than a positive one.
Yeah, well, and I'm not sure where it cut out, but I was saying arrogance is having a sense of superiority to other people, an inflated sense of your own worthiness versus others. And my experience is truly empowered people don't need to prove or please or impress. They don't have to let others know that they are better than, and actually they're very humble people because they're very grounded. They're also very connected to the innate value of all people, and I think have access to their own empathy and compassion because they're not trying to prove anything. They're not in that posturing mode. And so to me, there is a distinct difference there. And then obviously that's the different aspects and different natures of power. But to me, being truly, when we're really empowered, we don't have a need to assert our superiority. In fact, we just want to empower others.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good answer. So tell me about your PhD.
Yeah, so I began my PhD when I moved to Singapore, where I've just moved back to the United States, and And so, yeah, I decided to do my dissertation. So it sort of was, it's a long process. I had coursework as part of it, but I was really interested. What is it that distinguishes women who defy the various barriers and rise to top tables in large organizations? That was sort of my data sample. So women who are either CEOs or in the C-suite of large multinational organizations. And we hear a lot about the lack of gender diversity and the lack of equity and all of the barriers and biases that women have to deal with. But clearly some women overcome them. And what is it that those women do? What are their traits? What are their drivers that distinguishes them? And so, yeah, I did a sort of deep qualitative study and interviewed a whole host of women and sort of dived into that, which was really interesting. And I know it was kind of driven from my own personal interest too, having grown up without any strong female role models. Without ever thinking for myself that I could ever be someone who would be in a senior leadership role. It just, there's a saying, you can't be what you can't see. And it's not quite true, but it's definitely harder when you don't have examples of people who look like you or who are like you in positions that you would aspire to be in or that you could potentially be in. And so yeah, that was very interesting study that reinforced some of what I already kind of speculated, some of my hypotheses, but also expanded on it. And obviously I had a far deeper sense of a lot of the different issues and the levers and what it's going to take to ultimately create a greater, more equitable world and a more even playing field.
So I'm just out of curiosity, what were some of your findings in terms of attributes of women that rose to those kind of levels of leadership?
Yeah, there was a host of different factors. Something that was interesting that emerged out of the data was childhood experiences that shaped them to be, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of being anti-fragile, but or being resilient. But, one of them had grown up in Northern Ireland in essentially a war zone, when it was the IRA were very active. And she said, I was a sort of quiet, introverted girl, but you learn to be brave when you don't know when you see a bag on the ground if there's a bomb in it. Others grew up in situations that, they had to help in their parents' shop. Sometimes their parents were small business owners and they had to help out at a young age or they were on a farm or many of them had to deal with some form of adversity. They moved around a lot. Not all of them. Many of them weren't from sort of privileged, educated, affluent backgrounds at all. A couple were, but the majority weren't. They had a very strong work ethic. Interesting.
Was it adversity? Was it always adversity, or is it responsibility?
There was a bit of both. There was a mixture, sometimes both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some people had to deal with change. Some people had to do with loss. Some people just had to step up, and they had younger siblings, and not all of them, but many of them. Some of them quite a few of them, which was really interesting to me, went to all-female schools. And they said that made them think, well, there was nothing they couldn't do, but they weren't sure that they would have had that belief system had they been competing with boys in their teens. But not all, obviously, not all of them. Some of them grew up with just 5 brothers, and they learned to be tough and deal with guys. Sure. But I think something that I found really interesting was they were not easily offended, and all of them had to deal with sexism and misogyny. All of them had Me Too stories of, mild or significant, but they were very much not defined by them. They were kind of like, they'd brush themselves off, move on. And as one woman said, she said, I didn't look to be slighted. And there were so many times people said things, and she said, but I didn't look to take offense. I was there to do the best job I could. And people would look at me and go, she said, people would look at me and go, how's this 5'2" blonde girl from the South? They would underestimate me. And she said, well, I just used that to my advantage. I just made sure I did an excellent job. And over time, people, came to perceive them differently. So, that's just one example. But some of those female leadership traits we talk about a lot, being very collaborative, consensus seeking, very focused on the team, the team's success. It wasn't about their success. and exercising power with versus power over. How can we all be empowered here versus I'm the boss, I have power over you?
I think, yeah, I feel like that's just a leadership quality in general, right? Is giving the people that you work with, your coworkers, your subordinates, giving them equity over their decisions and the direction of things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we obviously today there's been a shifting paradigm around leadership in the last 10, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
That old command and control, stand on the hill and this is what you shall all do, follow me. That's days of old. I still see that in organizations.
Wow.
In some organizations, but those organizations aren't doing so well. Well, my husband used to work for ExxonMobil, and I saw incredibly rigid, process-driven, not collaborative, not empowering sort of environment there, just anecdotally over the years. And I did some work with them too. And they're not doing so well right now, right? Because it totally suppresses creativity and the real conversations needed to be more innovative and to be more forward thinking. And but yes, women possess a lot. If there's a study by Harvard, women possess and are perceived as possessing the traits that are regarded as the most valuable leadership traits, that the ones that really help to lift other people up and to create those environments of belonging and inclusion that harnesses diversity in all its forms.
Yeah, I love that. On a small level, my wife is a clinic director for a physical therapy clinic here in Vancouver, and she runs a team of, I don't know, eight or 10 people, and I am constantly going to her for advice on how to run my team because she's so good at it. She's naturally very, very good. Again, it's at the collaborative working together for this greater good kind of thing, and so I'm always reaching out to her like, I've got this situation. What should I do? And she's always got the answer.
Well, aren't you fortunate to have such an awesome woman by your side?
Yeah, indeed. I want to circle back a little bit, maybe talk a little bit about your journey into coaching. You mentioned that you and your husband landed in Papua New Guinea for a while.
Yeah.
Why Papua New Guinea of all places? I love that. I love that. By the way, I've done the backpacking thing around the world as well, but maybe to not as many remote places as you.
Yeah,
I haven't been there before.
Well, there is a funny story about this, and I wrote about this in Stop Playing Safe, actually, my second book, which a little shameless plug here. It's the new edition, post-pandemic edition, is going to be coming out in September. So, I shared the story of how we had just got married and I had done a lot of backpacking and I had a business degree, but it was like, I really would love to live somewhere outside of Australia. And, but I'd like to actually earn money and not just be a poor backpacker. And he said, well, why don't we both see who we can get a job if our companies will move us? And he worked for one company and I work for another company. And we were thinking like New York, London, Paris, Rome, somewhere sort of semi-exotic, Shanghai. And he came
more exciting and romantic.
He said, I think I might be able to get us a move, like an international move. I was like, really? Like, wow, cool. Yeah, where? And he looked at me and goes, okay. And he, I think, poured me a glass of wine. And I was like, I was Port Moresby. And Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea, I think population, I don't know, 40,000 people or something. I'm not sure. Is known being Australian. It's Papua New Guinea is just above Australia. Some people think it's in Africa. But I mean, at the time, it was the most dangerous country outside of a war zone in the world. And it is actually a spectacularly beautiful country. I mean, that's the tragedy of PNG is it's culturally rich and naturally rich in resources and just so beautiful. But it is had incredibly inept, corrupt government, and And so we went up and had what's called a look-see, where you get to look and go, well, do we want to move here? Because we had to commit to 3 years. And, I remember getting up there and going, well, it's an adventure. And at that time, I was 26, I think. And I just was like, life is a daring adventure or nothing at all, to quote Helen Keller. And let's just do it. I mean, that was what was on offer. We didn't have New York or anything else. And so off we went to live in Papua New Guinea for 3 years. And he had a job there, and I got a job quickly after landing for a small marketing company. And we had extraordinary experiences there that honestly you could write a book about, because they sort of defy belief almost when you tell people some of the things that happened, because it really is you stepping into. I mean, there's parts of PNG that they're really just coming into the modern age. I mean, and you get on planes and there's some man next to you with a grass skirt and a massive bone through his nose and no shoes, and and the air stewards still had the traditional tattoos of their tribe all over their faces. And, you really knew, look, I'm not in a highly developed, sophisticated Western country, but I am so glad we had that experience there. I guess it was 3 years in my 20s when some people are making huge advances on their career. But I did a lot of deep personal work there. I ended up in an armed robbery. I ended up also losing my first baby. I was pregnant then, about nearing as we're getting closer to the end of our time there, at 20 weeks pregnant, 10 days after the robbery. And I had an eating disorder through my teens. I struggled with bulimia, and I thought I'd sort of dealt with it, and it all came back up there, maybe a little bit of the stress of just being there. And so I had to do a lot of deep inner work on myself while there. So there was and honestly, that's what led me onto the path I'm on today. I did a 12-step program that was focused on, was called Overeaters Anonymous. I was never like someone who was massively big or anything like that, but I was stuck in this toxic cycle and really a toxic relationship with food and my own body and self-image. And the work I did there, I discovered Wayne Dyer and Scott Peck and this whole world of self-help that I had never, ever been exposed to, never had any exposure, and found myself the confidant of a lot of people while also working on my own stuff. And that's part of what led to when I had that first miscarriage at 20 weeks along. I remember that following year thinking, well, I'm not going to be having a baby. And I went back to study. I was able to get into a university that did distance education, as it was in the day, and they'd send you big packets of papers. And I went back and did graduate studies in psychology. I started it there, and in my final year there. And, I look back now and realize that shifted the trajectory of my whole professional life. Who knows, I might have still been working in marketing, selling beer and still, but it just was, those experiences in my time there were pretty profound.
Sure.
So I look back on it and go, well, I grew a lot as a human while I was there. Yeah.
You mentioned, it sounds like, you went through a lot. It was kind of a self-defining time in your life. You mentioned a 12-step program. What else what does self-work look like for you? Is that sitting down and journaling? Is that going on long walks by yourself? Is that all of the above?
No, it does. So journaling's been a part of my life since, I think it was Dear Diary, I like this boy and she's not my friend, when I was 12, but I have actually had a diary since I was 12. And it's obviously become far more introspective than it was back then. But that's been a core part of my own personal development journey and evolution, is journaling. It's helped me. I feel I use journaling to connect to what I call my inner sage, or the divine within, that deep wisdom, to process emotions. Sometimes when I've been hurt, or I'm riddled with anxiety, or I'm struggling with something, I'm feeling left out or jealous or whatever, writing about it has been a great way for me to process what I'm feeling. And I remember actually in the months after the double whammy of the robbery and then the miscarriage, I actually didn't even just journal once a day. Sometimes I journal twice a day, in the morning and the evening. That was hugely a big part of my emerging from those experiences with what I would call post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
And I feel I've had numerous adversities, to use that word, that have been a catalyst for post-traumatic growth for me. And my own spiritual belief system has definitely been instrumental in facilitating that.
Yeah. When is the 6th book coming out about all of that?
Yeah, I don't know. Michael, I don't know. Writing a book, I've yet to reach a point of fame or celebrity or platform where you write a book and you've sold 100,000 before it even hits the shelves. And I wrote my last book, my 5th book, You've Got This, came out, ironically enough. It's kind of funny as time goes by. It came out in March 2020 as the wheels were falling off the world. And my husband, it came out the week after my husband was hospitalized with COVID, and I was put into a 14-day stay-at-home order. I was living in Singapore, and he was in hospital, and I had 3 kids on the other side of the world who couldn't come to Singapore because they closed the borders, and I couldn't leave my apartment, and where I was locked in with another one of my children, my son, who actually got COVID from my husband, but somehow I didn't. I think it was my feral childhood on the farm that, I don't know, I didn't. And yeah. And I remember just looking at my book covers, I had boxes of these books, and I'm like, you've got this, you've got this, you've got this. And it's funny because I've had a lot of disruption in the last few years, and, being split up from kids living in multiple continents and not knowing how we were going to get back to the United States. I'm not a US citizen, and it's hard to get here if you're not a citizen. And so just sort of having to just trust that whatever happens, I can figure it out. And we have figured it out. And, but it hasn't been a smooth path at all. And so when I wrote You've Got This, it was a lot of energy that went into it, and a lot of energy launching it, then suddenly launching it virtually. And so I've yet to, it's like having a baby, Michael. I'm like, I haven't prepared myself to go back and I love writing books. It's actually the marketing the books. It's selling books. Yeah. It's books that takes enormous energy. Someone could just say, hey, Margie, we'll move $1 million every time you write one. I'd be like, don't worry, I'll be writing one a year.
So it sounds like we might have to wait a little bit before we get the book on journaling as a pathway to personal growth in Papua New Guinea.
Oh yeah, no, but I did write about journaling and You've Got This. So
okay. Yeah, tell me about that. That's a good one, because actually, so right now I've got a personal mirror mantra that I do, and it changes from time to time. And right now it's, you've got this. Everything you need to know, you already know. Everything you need is already inside you. All the answers you need are already inside you. That's what it is. You've got this. All the answers you need are already inside you. Yeah. So it sounds like this might be a book that I need to read.
You will love it. In fact, you will love it, but I'm just listening to you. You've got to download. I've got this free manifesto. It's in the book, but I made this printer-friendly version, and you can download it for free from the book's webpage, which is on my website. It's just margiewarrell.com/YGT. But yeah, You've Got This manifesto pretty much says that you have everything required to rise to whatever life is calling from you and calling to you. And I think so often it is a lack of self-trust, a lack of faith in ourselves and our ability to rise to life's challenging moments that causes so much angst and stress. And that if we operate from that belief system, that whatever happens, and sometimes really shitty things happen. And I know this because I've experienced many shitty things, and some of them, they don't end with a happy story, happy ending. But when we still really operate from that belief system, whatever happens, it's okay, and I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it totally transforms our experience of being alive.
Mm-hmm.
And it liberates us to pursue bigger, more meaningful endeavors than we might otherwise do.
Mm-hmm.
Because whatever happens, you'll figure it out. You've got this. And I think that learning to trust ourselves is the ultimate hero's journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult for me. I think I've been through the shit as well, and I've seen what the dark side looks like, and I'm confident in my resilience. But there's also a lot of fear around growth and what that looks like, and I find myself in my cycle that I find myself in is in learning and reading books. And I will read a book that has all these great strategies and tactics in it, and I'll say, that sounds great, I'm going to do that. And then when I finish that book, I'll pick up the next one and continue to read.
Yeah.
And so that's my coach said, everything you need to know, you've got all the answers in you. You know everything you need to know. Stop learning. You don't need to keep doing that right now.
And I actually think that's true. I think we can become self-help junkies. I mean, you just look at my bookshelf, and I can assure you I have plenty of those books. But if I just applied 10% of the ones I've already read, right. And you know what? Sometimes, Michael, I know this probably sounds ridiculous. I shouldn't be even admitting this, but I sometimes just pick up my own book and I open it up, and I'll go, that's really good advice.
Which book in particular?
My book Brave is one of my favorites because it's 50 short chapters, like 50 ways to be brave. But You've Got This is probably it's my most recent one, and I've become a better writer. It's my most soulful book. It's my one where I've really shared my own, just gone, and here's where I struggle, and here's what I've learned from all my struggles. And and I think that's just me kind of growing into my own power that allowed me to write a book that I think is the most readable book too. You just get better when you write, right? You just I never aspired to be an author. I wasn't Elizabeth Gilbert who just felt like I was born to write, but I do feel deeply passionate about what I write about. And so I've just had to kind of cultivate my writing, which begins with, as Annie Lamott, the writer, says, give yourself permission to write a lousy first draft. Well, for me, it's been give yourself permission to write a less than brilliant masterpiece, and just write the best book you can. And that's been what allowed me to write anything, because I've been extremely aware of the fact that I never studied writing. I didn't feel that I was put on earth to write. I do feel like I was put on earth to empower people, though.
Yeah, nice. Very good. Margie, is there anything that I didn't touch upon that you would like to chat about before we wrap up?
Oh, you know what, Michael? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground. I would just encourage everyone who is listening to just take a little bit of time to get really quiet and just breathe into wherever they feel fear and anxiety in their body, and just to label whatever they're feeling, label wherever they're not feeling grounded and powerful, and breathe in fear. Sorry, breathe in faith and breathe out fear, and just ask, just sit with the question. If I trusted myself to do whatever I feel most called to do, what would that be? And I think that if we move in that direction every day of our lives, we're going to live infinitely and more meaningful and fulfilling lives. So that's all I would just encourage people to do. And of course, also go over and download that manifesto. I'm sure I'll give you the link, Michael, to share with people. But download that You've Got This manifesto, and feel free to just grab a copy of my book. Or I've also got my own Live Brave podcast, which I've put on pause for a while, but there's a lot of great podcasts that people might enjoy listening to. Beautiful.
Dr. Margie Warrell, thank you so much for joining us on the Remarkable Coach podcast. Her website is Margie Warrell, that's WARRELL, 2 R's, 2 L's, /YGT for You've Got This. And you can get the book there and the worksheet as well. Is that right?
Yeah, the manifesto. Yeah, and otherwise, I'll just connect with people. If you hang out on social media, I'm there, and I'd love to hear from people who've listened to the podcast too. It'd be awesome to connect.
Beauty. Margie, thank you so much for joining us. Take care. See you next time.
All right. Be well.
Cheers.